Psalm 4 this morning is a great psalm. This kind of rounds out our beginning of the year emphasis. I chose 3 words to help us think through 2019, the words serve, love, and give. Today we're going to be talking about give from Psalm 4. I read a great blog post this week. It said this: walk through any bookstore in America and you might think that we have a corner on happiness. Cover after cover promises some secret to new or deeper contentment, each selling tens of thousands of copies. Habits, relationships, food, forgiveness, work, exercise, minimalism. You can choose from 1,000 different recipes for happiness. Whether people are actually reading the books or not, all the pages suggest that we are basking in happiness as a culture. But the real secret is that while we're swimming in money, comfort, and entertainment, and countless books on happiness, we are still starving for happiness. All the new titles published each year do not prove that we've figured out what makes us happy. They're evidence instead of a famine. Listen to this next line because it's so good. Thousands of pages of cake pictures piled in front of crowds, fainting for lack of food. I love that quote, because it's so true. You would think that in America we have a corner on happiness, but we really don't. Many people are unhappy because they're not finding their true joy and happiness from the Lord. I would even take it a step further and say that not just are we unhappy, but in our culture today there seems to be heightened levels of anger. Have you noticed that it just seems that we live in an angry culture? You look at the TV, you look at news, and people are always angry about something. They're angry about politics. They're angry about injustice. They're angry because they don't have more or make more. Social Security doesn't pay more. My pension isn't better. I don't have a bigger house, or I need a bigger car. And they're angry. And people just seem to be angry today because they don't find their joy and satisfaction in what they should. They're upset they're not getting their own way. They're upset and angry that life just doesn't seem to be going the way that they hope, and they're not getting out of life what they hoped to get out of life. And the result is that people look for somebody to blame. They look for an object upon which to be angry. Just this week I was looking through some headlines. That's always interesting. Hey, let's look at some headlines for today's sermon. It's kind of depressing. We've got Nancy Pelosi, who's angry at Trump, and so she's not going to let him give the State of the Union speech. And then in retort, Trump grounds her flight overseas to a visit she was going to make. And I'm reading these articles, and I'm just thinking, our government has turned into an elementary school playground. Can I get a witness? Anybody with me on that? This just is insane what's happening. We have a government shutdown with 800,000 employees that are not getting paid right now, and people are angry. Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, one of the richest men, is getting divorced. And everything that you've seen publicly has been calm and peaceful. And, we still like each other. Everything's fine. We're still friends. They're trying to make it look as smooth as possible so they don't upset Amazon stock or get themselves in the tabloids. You look around at other headlines. People are angry at Russian collusion. People are angry because they think the Russian collusion is just nothing. It's a witch hunt. People are angry at the vice president's wife. That was a headline this week. The LGBT community is upset because she is teaching at a school in Washington, D.C., a Christian school that just so happens to hold the traditional 2,000-year-old view on human sexuality and marriage. How dare she, right? That was editorialized a little bit for you this morning. Angry. And then, potentially, later today, all of America is going to be angry and outraged if we have to watch the Patriots go to another Super Bowl. Huh? Good grief. Anger. Man, people are angry today. It's interesting as you read Psalm 3 and Psalm 4. King David was dealing with a culture much like this. A culture of anger. People were angry at David. David is on the run in Psalm 3 and Psalm 4. There's been a revolt in Israel. His subjects are angry. They're rebelling against him. They don't like the way the kingdom has been going. They don't like what they've been getting. They want more from him as king. And they've risen up in anger and rebellion. And to make matters worse, it's his son, Absalom, that's leading the charge, that's trying to take over his throne. What does David do in response? How does David handle it when people are coming at him from all sides? How does David handle it when people are angry at him for things that aren't his fault? What does he do in that moment? Well, we can learn from this psalm. Because instead of getting upset, instead of getting in turmoil and frustrated, David turns to the Lord and he turns to God. This is considered a nighttime psalm, Psalm 4, meaning that it was written at night, written before bed, written at a time where David was on the run, another night out of his castle, another night of uncertainty, and he comes to the Lord. I don't know about you, but if you've been in a difficult time, sometimes the trial gets so real at nighttime or first thing in the morning. Maybe you've experienced that before where you've had sleeplessness because of something that's gone on. Or you're in a situation that's causing you to not be able to find rest, or you wake up in the morning and just for a moment when you wake up, you've forgotten about the circumstance, but then it all floods back in your mind again. You have this sinking feeling and remembering what's going on. That's what David's experiencing. So what does he do? How does he handle this? Well, I want you to see that he turns this upside down. He goes to God and he finds faith, joy, and confidence. Let's look at what David admonishes us to do from this psalm. I want you to see, first of all, that David, let's see if my thing's working. I don't know if it is. There we go. What advice does David have for us? Number one, enter into the place of prayer to find the place of peace. Enter into the place of prayer to find the place of peace. Look at verse 1. It says, "Answer me when I call, God who vindicates me. You freed me from affliction. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer." He goes to the Lord. The word affliction in this text can mean being in a tight spot or being in a corner. I'm cornered. I'm surrounded. I'm in a tight spot. That's what that word means. And what David does in this moment is he goes to the Lord and he inquires of the Lord. This gives us a great example because sometimes when we are in a situation that's difficult, we go to the Lord and we're just a little bit wild and out of control. Have you ever been like that before? God, help me! I don't know what to do, right? You're just like, had it up to here. You're just overwhelmed. Look what David does, verse 1. Answer me when I call, God, who vindicates me. You freed me from affliction. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. He gives us such a great example. In the middle of the most difficult circumstance in David's life, he comes to God and he says this, Lord, I know you're going to hear me. And the reason I know you're going to hear me is because you've always heard me. You've always answered my prayer. You've freed me from affliction. You've saved my soul. You've always met my needs. You've always been there. And because I know you've always been there, I know you're going to be there again. Man, what a great pattern to follow, isn't it? In the middle of a tough time, to go to the place of prayer, to find the place of peace, to come to the Lord with confidence, knowing that He is there and He's going to help. Number two, I want you to see this. Encourage others to look to God and not their circumstances. The next three verses are so fascinating because David turns from himself and he looks towards his persecutors. He looks towards those who are after him. He looks towards his son who's trying to grab his throne. In 3 verses in a row here, he gives them something to think about. But what he gives them to think about is things that we can grab onto as well. Look at verse 2. It says, "How long, exalted ones, will my honor be insulted? How long will you love what is worthless and pursue a lie?" And so in verse 2, he tells them, look, your anger is rooted in false pretense. Your anger is misappropriated. You're pursuing lies. You're pursuing half-truths. What you think is true is not. The kingdom is really not going as badly as you think. You're really not entitled to all that you think you're entitled to. It's a lie. You're pursuing a lie, is what David says there. And this is instructive to us. Because how many times in our lives have you been upset about your circumstances? And in the middle of those circumstances, you assign fault with someone or something. And you take your circumstances and you shove them off to somebody else and point the finger to somebody else and say, well, it's their fault. That wouldn't have happened. That person would have. And you're pursuing a lie when you do that. It reminds me of the protests on college campuses where they denounce all the debt that the students are carrying. Students are upset. Oh, we're in debt. We don't want to be in debt. It's my parents' fault that I'm in debt. It's your fault. You charge too much. And at the end of the day, the protest is actually all about that the debt should just be forgiven to these college students, right? It's their fault. It's not my fault. It's my debt, but it's not my fault that I have the debt. It's their fault. Somebody talked me into this. No. Take responsibility for yourself. You're pursuing a lie, as David says. Or maybe in your home there's a bit of a tussle going on with some of your kids, and you come and you try to figure out what's going on. You say, hey. Any other parent have to do that before? That progressive hey thing that gets louder and louder before you kind of shut it down, whatever's going on. Hey, wait. What's going on? Kid A, what are you doing? Why'd you do that? What do they say? Well, you know it's bad news when the wells start, right? Well, my sister, no. Let's start with you. What did you do? Well, I didn't, my sister, no. What did you do? You're pursuing a lie. You're shoving the blame somewhere else. So David says that to them in verse 2. How long, exalted ones, will you honor? Will my honor be insulted? How long will you love what is worthless and pursue a lie? Then he goes on and says something else in verse 3. Know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for himself. The Lord will hear when I call to him. He charges them to understand that God appointed their circumstances because God appointed him as their king. And so when you're in the middle of a difficult time, when angry people are around you, there's something going on in your life, understand that God is still in control. David tells them that. I'm the king by appointment of God. Listen, you're fighting against God if you fight against me. And he points their attention to know that God is in control. And then in verses 4 and 5, he tells them one final thing. Be angry and do not sin on your bed. Reflect in your heart and be still. Offer sacrifices in righteousness and trust in the Lord. He charges them to reconsider their actions and go to worship. He says, sleep on it. You need to think about what you're doing. Why don't you just go to bed and sleep on it for a night? Why don't you think it through in a night's sleep, just to remember, just to think about what you are doing, and then go and sacrifice. Go and worship. Take what's happening in your life and worship. But I got to tell you something. When you're going through something tough, when you're tempted to point the finger at other people, when you're tempted to pursue lies and play the victim, there's nothing that can be better and more therapeutic than spending some time in God's Word and just bowing before the King of the universe and saying, you are God and I'm not. And that's what David's telling them to do in these texts here. He's telling them to go to God to sacrifice and to worship. I want to go to the next idea this morning, number 3, and we find it in the last couple of verses. Thirdly, entreat the Lord. Let's back up one. Entreat the Lord for true joy and peace that only he can provide. Entreat the Lord for true joy and peace that only he can provide. Look with me at verses 6 rather. Many are asking, who can show us anything good? And right here, verse 6, if you have a pen in your hand, you might want to circle verse 6. This is the crux of the psalm. This is the real heart of this psalm. This is what was going wrong. The people were upset. The people were angry at David. The people were rioting. They were rebelling. And here's the reason why they were so upset. Here's why they were so angry. Because they were looking to heaven at God. They were looking at David in his palace. And they were saying, come on, give us the good stuff. We want more. We need more to be happy. It's encouraging to read texts like this because you realize that nothing really has changed in 3,000 years of history, right? Look what it says there in verse 6. Show us something good. Who can give us something good? That's what they wanted. That's what they wanted. And David's entreating them. He's telling them, entreat the Lord. If you want something good, you're looking in the wrong place. It's not about stuff. It's not about stuff. It's about having the blessing of the Lord in your life. Man, many people do this today. They think that the solution to everything is going to be this program or that program, or if the government does this, or if my job does this. And friends, you're never going to find that happiness you're looking for. You're never going to alleviate the anger you feel in your heart over your circumstances by fixing this or that. The only solve for those things is to find your joy in the Lord. And that's what it says in verse 6. Look at the end of verse 6. David had said, many are asking, who can show us something good? We want more stuff. David says, no, if you really want happiness, here's how you do it. Verse 6, the end of verse 6. Let the light of your face shine on us, Lord. That's where we find the answer to our angst and the anger and the desire for more. And then he goes on in verses 7 and following, and I love how he says this. Verse 7, it goes, you have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and new wine abound. Verse 7 stuck out to me in my Bible reading. In fact, I was reading through the Psalms, and I saw verse 7, and I thought, I got to preach on that. I don't even know how I'm going to fit it in. I don't even know what series it's going to fit in, but that is a fantastic psalm, and so I thought, today, this is it. Today, Psalm 4, because that verse is amazing. Look with me in your Bibles again. It says, you have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and their new wine abound. Do you understand what he's saying? It says, God, I find more joy in you than all of those people find when they have everything that they think they need, when their silos are full, when their wine vats are overflowing, when they have the house they always dreamed for, when they have the pension that they were promised, when they have all the cars they ever wanted. God, when I have you and the joy that I have from you exceeds any joy that anybody could ever have by getting stuff. That's where true joy is found. It's in finding it in the Lord. He makes that proclamation in verse 7. What a wonderful verse. And look at the glorious result of this in verse 8. He says, I will both lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, Lord, make me live in safety. As David's going to bed that night, facing the most difficult circumstance of his life, this is what he tells us. I'm going to sleep like a baby. I'm not going to have any trouble at all. I can sleep. I can rest just fine. Even though the world is raging around me, I can rest. I can sleep. Why? Because of what he just said here in verses 7 and 8. You have put more joy in my heart than any amount of stuff could ever give me. I lie down and sleep in peace because you, God, you are my joy. You are my safety. And listen, my friends, when your life is about God's glory, listen carefully, when your life is about God's glory and when your treasure is in heaven, your soul will find the deepest and the sweetest rest than you can ever experience. You will sleep well at night, knowing that your treasure and your joy is found in Christ, not in the things that you have. And so if I were to summarize this psalm this morning, I'd say it like this. We can have rest not because of what we hold, but because of who holds us. And when we know who holds us, and when we find our joy in God, the result is sweet rest and satisfaction. Knowing that we're okay. Knowing that all the anger and the angst around us, it's going to be okay. And we can turn to those who are trying to find something in life, and we can share with them the glorious news of this, that true joy, rest, peace, satisfaction is found only in Jesus Christ. And so this morning, as we kind of think about these things and think about these truths, you're probably sitting here wondering, what in the world does this have to do with give, right? What does this have to do with giving? Well, I think it has everything to do with giving. So let's look at some personal and corporate applications. Let's look first at the giving of our resources. Here's what this psalm has to do with giving. Listen now. Coming to the firm belief that the peace and joy that God gives is better than having full silos and overflowing wine vats and having a bank account that you don't have to worry about, or having your retirement set. Listen, knowing that the peace and the joy that comes from the Lord is better than those things, that will free us up to give the way that we should. Why? Because we're not depending on our resources to make us happy. When people have understood the truth of Psalm 4, verses 6, 7, and 8, when you really understand the truth of those verses, you understand that your joy is not derived by the things that you have. And when your joy is not derived by the things that you have, it frees you to give, because you say, I'm going to give it away because it's not what I need to provide my joy and my peace and my satisfaction, my comfort, my security. That's not where it is. And giving is a great exercise. Giving is a spiritual discipline that trains our heart to focus more on God and His glory. It is a very visible and physical sign, a way that we can show that I'm not depending on myself. I'm not depending on my resources. I'm depending instead on God. I believe in the principle of the tithe. And it's interesting with the tithe, it's just small enough, right, to make you look at it and say, oh, it's just 10%. But on the other hand, it's just big enough to make you rearrange your budget. It's just big enough to make you squeeze just a bit, to rearrange things, to think through your priorities. And I think that's what it is intended to do, that giving to the Lord ought to be a bit of a squeeze, that ought to be a little bit of a difficulty, that it ought to change our lifestyle a little bit. It makes us rearrange our priorities and say, what is really important in our life? We need to make the Lord first, and so because of that, we're going to give to the Lord, and then everything else has to fit around our giving to the Lord. I don't know what you do for giving. I don't know how you're worshiping in that way, but giving is a matter of worship. It's saying to God that, God, you've given me everything. I want to give back to you. I want to symbolically show that I believe you are the one that provides everything. It's a worship, an act of worship when we do that, because we're showing honor to our God when we give. Again, I believe in the principle of the tithe. I would say it like this. I think the generosity begins at the tithe. You see that from Scripture. It's a principle that goes Old and New Testaments. And I would encourage you here this morning, I don't know where you're at with your giving, but please consider honoring the Lord in this. It is a spiritual discipline, and it's one of those spiritual disciplines that helps you train your heart and your mind on God. It's a way to physically say, God, I'm not trusting in my own resources, I'm trusting in you. Having said that, I got to tell you, as a church, we are doing phenomenal right now financially. I hesitate saying that, right? I don't want everybody to say, hey, we're doing great, just kind of whatever. No, we are doing terrible financially. My kids are going to starve. No, let's not do that, right? That's what the TV preachers do. We are doing very well, but that's not an excuse for not participating in worshipful giving. The Lord still wants us to do that. As well as we're doing, we can always do better, right? As well as we're doing, man, I would love to see the debt on our building retired. Wouldn't that be amazing? To free up more money to make more and better disciples, to expand church planting in even bigger ways in other places. We can always use more resources for the glory of God. As we kind of come to this part of the sermon, I ask you to look at your the pew in front of you. You'll find cards, and one of those cards says give. Just take that out, if you would, and read it over, look it over, take it home with you. Maybe you're sitting here today, you could fill that out. Maybe you've already filled one out, that's fine. Really, I'm having you look at this to just reevaluate in your own mind what you're doing in your worshipful giving. And then for those of you who are not participating at all, or those of you who aren't participating maybe as much as you should, to consider that, to pray about that. You notice here on the card the slice of where the money goes and how you can give. And at the bottom it says, my intentions for worshipful giving. And you can fill this out and put it in the offering plates either today or another time. I think this is a good thing to do, to make a commitment between you and the Lord for what you're going to do to honor Him with your resources. Look it over. Think about it. It's not easy. It's not something that we enjoy doing and thinking about. But God's called us to do that. And we need to do that. We need to be faithful in this area of worship. I want to go to the next idea here of giving our resources. Secondly, I want to think about for 2019, giving the living water. We've concluded a series in the book of John. For me personally, the book of John was very spiritually enriching. I really enjoyed going through all those texts of Scripture. One of the best sections for me, at least, was John chapter 4, the story of the woman at the well and giving living water. And just continuing to think about giving living water. And so let's think about this personally, giving the living water personally. How can you continue to think about giving living water to people who are desperately thirsty for Christ? Who do you have in your life that you could share with? I think that every Christian at any given time in your life, every Christian ought to have somebody that you've identified, somebody in your life that you're thinking, that person needs to know Jesus, and I want to be the one to bring living water to this person. Who is that for you? I would encourage you in 2019 to identify those people, to identify a person, to make some efforts to strengthen relationships with some unbelievers, to get to know your neighbors a little better, maybe to invite your neighbors over for supper sometime, or to have them at your house just to get to know them, to talk to them eventually about Christ. One of the phrases that we use here a lot is that we build bridges of grace that are strong enough to support gospel conversations. A bridge of grace is inviting somebody over for supper. And at some point, let that bridge be strong enough to support gospel conversations. Who can you invite to church this year in 2019? Listen, every Sunday is a good Sunday to invite somebody to church. There's certain days that are, you could say, better. Easter Sunday, Christmas Eve, but every Sunday is a good Sunday to invite somebody to church. Who could you invite to church this year in 2019? Let's go on and think about corporate. How can we do better at giving living water corporately? I think on a corporate level, we can help do this with our assimilation process. And I want to talk a little bit about this morning, what we're doing with our assimilation process. We're going to try to streamline it a little bit coming here in 2019. Nick Harsh, he's our pastoral assistant, has been working hard on this project. We're kind of rethinking how we do assimilation. And what is assimilation? Assimilation is the process of somebody walking through the front door to becoming a member of the church, active and plugged in and growing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what assimilation is. I really would prefer, instead of use the word assimilation, I'd prefer to use the word discipleship. That's really what it is. It's discipleship. We want to take people where they are and see where they need to go. And so coming up here this year, we're going to change this around a little bit. We've had several things on the process. We're going to streamline it. And now soon, probably in February or March, we're going to start a class. It's just a short class. We're going to call it Discover Soteria. And it's going to run 2 times a month, every month, first and third Sunday. And so when somebody comes to church here, we say, we're glad you're here this morning. If maybe you're a visitor here this morning, we can do a dry run, okay? I want to see who my guinea pigs are. Any visitors? No, don't. I'm kidding. That's what they used to do in churches growing up. All the visitors, please stand. And everybody's like, gape, look back. Thank you for coming today. We're not going to do that, okay? But what we will say is if you're a guest here this morning, we want to invite you to something we call Discover Soteria. And it's going to be just a short explanation. It's, in a sense, replacing what we've done with Party with the Pastors, but we're still going to maybe include some elements of Party with the Pastors, some food and things like that, so there's going to be some carryover. It's just going to simplify it, and it's going to be done with more frequency, so twice a month. Someone comes, they're never within a couple of weeks from getting to attend a Discover Soteria. From there, we plug people in and want to move people towards Starting Point, and we're going to take Starting Point and condense it quite a bit and run them more frequently. And so we'll have Starting Points beginning every several weeks, and part of Starting Point will also be the membership class as well. So you're not having to do a separate class, you do this and then do that. It's all contained. And so really the one thing that we want to funnel people into is the Discover Soteria, and then move them to those Starting Point classes. And after Starting Point, you'll have everything you need to join the church if you would like to. So the point of this is to really streamline it, to move people in a way that gets them connected quickly and gets them an understanding of the Word through Starting Point, helps us know where they're at spiritually as well. So as you come to 2019, you think, who can I invite to church? This is the new process. You're going to want to push people towards Discover Soteria and Starting Point. We're excited about how this is going to work. And then we're working on also a new discipleship process that takes place primarily within our growth groups, that gives our growth group leaders a process to follow and different points to track people with. In this, I'm not meaning to make this sound creepy, but we really want to kind of track with all of you, to track with where you're at. We're not trying to creep on you, okay? But just to see where you are in your spiritual walk and where you need to go next, and help use your growth groups and your growth group leaders to push you along in that process. And so that's kind of where we're headed, to help us in our mission to make more and better disciples who learn, grow, and serve. Let's go on to the next idea this morning: creating new wells for giving living water. So I want to think about what this means, creating new wells for giving living water. How can we as a church help to create new wells for living water? We already have a lot of these going on. We have Sunday services, we have classes, we have Starting Point, we have Awana, we have VBS, we have Easter Sunday, we have the Easter Extravaganza. We have a radio program every day on 99.3 from 11:45 to noon. You can catch portions of my sermons on the radio. So these are wells for living water. But let's talk about new wells for living water. The first one under this would be church plants. What are we doing for church plants? Well, if you're new here to the church, we have a church plant going on right now in the city of Phoenix, Arizona. It's going well. They regularly run in the 30s. They are preparing for an open house on February 17th. Write that down. Put that on your prayer list. Pray for our group of people in Phoenix as they prepare for their open house on February 17th. They would just like to have warm bodies present. So this is an invitation for any of you to go to Phoenix in February. Any takers? Huh? Sound good? You can coordinate it with them. Seriously, though, they say, hey, we would love to have people come. They just want to fill that place up. They've moved to meeting at a school on Sunday mornings. It's going well. They've got visitors. Dave Christ, Pastor Dave, was telling me he's got a stranger study going with 2 families right now from the air base. And so they are actively pursuing unbelievers as a church plant. That's a good thing. We want to keep helping them do well there in Phoenix. I would also ask, maybe where would we see the potential for more church plants? Is there an opportunity here in our city? Is there an opportunity other places? And we're kind of keeping our eyes open, but we also rely on hearing from you, our congregation. What do you think? Where do you feel God leading us as a church? Let's go to the next idea of church adoption. What is church adoption? Church adoption is where you come to a church that is in a difficult spot. They need some help. They need maybe to be rebooted. And we come in and we help them reboot their church. In many cases, we would maybe give them our name. There was a church here in town that was talking to us pretty seriously about doing church adoption, and it kind of fell through at the last minute. But what it would have meant for us, for that church, is for there to be a Soteria church in that community, and we would have helped them, in a sense, replant their church. We are looking for these types of opportunities to help churches that are hurting. This, in a sense, is like church planting, except it's I don't want to say better, but it's really effective because you have a church that already has resources. And in some cases, churches that already have a building. So if you don't have to reduplicate, there are thousands of churches all over this state that are dying every week, every year, that could use a ministry like this. We're looking for those opportunities. So as you hear and see things, let us know if you know of opportunities for church adoption. And then the third one would be church networking. I see the need for what we would call the Soteria Church Network. This would not be planting or adopting. This would be going into a church and helping them with resources, giving them things that they need, giving them processes, giving them materials. If you plant a church, it takes a lot of work, effort, hours of time and planning to figure out all your processes, to get things printed, to figure out how you're going to do church. It could be a great help if we could take a notebook to a church and say, here you go, here's all these resources, just plug in and play, just implement these resources for doing church. That's kind of the vision behind that. There's a Ace Hardware near my house. I used to live a lot closer to it. I love my Ace Hardware. It's nice. Ace is the place with the helpful hardware man, face, guy. Help me out. What is it? I can't remember. Anyway, Ace Hardware. I think Ace Hardware is a good gig for guys that want to start a hardware store. You're not going to compete with Lowe's and Home Depot, Menards. But you think about starting a hardware store. Let's say this week you're like, I want to start a hardware store. That's my new calling in life, to start a hardware store. So you go, you rent a space, get in the space, you're like, man, I need stuff. I need screws, and I need hammers, and I need nails, and I need screwdrivers, and all these things. Where am I going to get this stuff? So you go to manufacturers, you go to a metal manufacturer, and you contract to make some screws that have your name of your hardware on the package. And then you go to a drywall spackling place, and you have to get a contract with them to get drywall spackling and hammers and all the things. And then you realize there's this place called Ace Hardware, and what Ace does is that you start your hardware store and you use all of their resources that they already have. Their inventory systems, their computer systems, they have all these parts. If you get screws from Ace Hardware, it has Ace Hardware brand because they produce it and then give it to all of their stores. See, it's a great way to save time in doing this yourself. So in a similar sense, could we do that with churches? Could we build a church network like this where churches would voluntarily join the network and then be part of our church planting process as well? We could expand the people we bring to the table for church planting. These are some of the ideas we're spinning. Be in prayer for our staff. At the end of February, we're taking a trip out of state to talk to a church that's interested in partnering with us like this, to let us help them with resources and get them on deck. And in return, they would possibly be partner with us in supporting Soteria Ministry, supporting church plants, and some of the other things that we do. So be in prayer. We're taking a trip to go explore that. I think there's maybe some future for more of that kind of thing with churches that need help. So what are we doing in 2019? Well, long story short, we're doing a lot in 2019. And I like this phrase, creating new wells for giving living water, to help dig wells, to help give people wells that are already functioning, where living water can come and meet people's needs. I would just ask you this morning, right now, what's your next step today? And as I do that, go ahead and take your Connect cards out this morning. You can find that in the pew in front of you. Just grab a Connect card. I'd like to know what your next step is this morning. As you think about 2019, making more and better disciples who learn, grow, and serve, maybe your next step is to join. You've been holding off membership. Unfortunately, we don't have our new process in place yet, so you're still going to have to sign up for the membership class. But I'm sure Pastor Zach will have another membership class for whoever would like to sign up for membership class. We would love to have you join. If you've been around here for a while, there's no reason to not join. We think it's a biblical concept. And even if it's not a biblical concept, we say that it is. So just go along with it, right? We are your pastors. Join the church. Maybe your next step this morning is to think about your giving and to get on board with what God wants you to do for giving. Maybe your next step this morning is to help find people that you can give the living water to. Maybe you would write down on your Connect card today, please pray for me as I reach out to so-and-so with the living water of Jesus Christ. I don't know what your next step is this morning, but would you write that down? Think through what you can do this week, this year, 2019, to make more and better disciples with us as a church, as we seek to create new wells to give the living water of Jesus Christ. You can fill that out and drop that in the offering plate in just a moment. And then as we close the service and take the offering this morning, we have a special song to do today. It's actually, I was going to do it a year ago when we preached through John 4, because this song is a musical retelling of the story of the woman at the well. And so last year I preached through John 4. It just didn't work out, and so I'm going to use it today as kind of a capstone on the John series, and just a charge to all of you still, again, to bring the living water to thirsty people.